this idea of cap and trade. By changing a system of regulation of emissions that set limits, so a permit would be granted free of charge to a utility or a factory to emit a certain amount of pollution, and the factory could not pollute in excess of that permit. Or if it did so and was caught, then it would be penalized. He called that essentially criminalization. And so, yeah, you could see the reasoning of it in an intuitive way, okay, right? But at the highest level, and I was definitely looking at the highest level, I was thinking, you're telling me that we have too many factories causing climate change and polluting, and that the response is that now we're going to sell the sky. And that the selling of the sky will cause a perfection of the marketplace. And it struck me as just being incredibly dystopian. I at the time was really interested with the encirclement of nature, you know, the separation of land into sacrifice zones and protected areas. And the elimination of the third category, which had been known as the world, namely wilderness. Just places that are undesignated, the forest. You know, there is no forest anymore. There are nature reserves, you know, there are parks. And then there are sacrifice areas. And so for me, this encirclement of nature is also an encirclement of the mind in a sort of Foucauldian way, right? That our consciousness is transformed by the absence of wilderness, by the absence of an outside, the disappearance of the outside. So now the atmosphere is no longer outside. The air is not the air. The air is a commodity that someone's paying for. And now the cap and dividend model, which is essentially a sort of socialist version of the same concept, is that public owns that air, and therefore the public should receive a dividend when that permit is sold. And so the public is bought in, much like the Alaskan pipeline pays, you know, your annual check to Alaskan citizens for the pumping of oil through that pipeline. And so today, what originated as a very essentially right-wing, or, you know, Republican conservative policy has become, through the shifting of the Democratic Party to the right, has become a Democratic policy. And today, whereas today, it's the Democrats calling for cap and trade and the Republicans calling for nothing and just denial of the problem exists at all. All the discussions about the price of solar power versus the price of coal power were treated as if they were paramount to the cost of solar power and the cost of coal power or gas-fired power, whatever, nuclear power. I realized that that was an utterly superficial, two-dimensional comparison, that it was meaningless, that it's preposterous to compare the cost of these energies. Why? Because the cost of the energy is a function of the financial structure of the investment. It's not a function of the cost of the panel. And so, are you talking about a 5-year payback or a 10-year payback or a 20-year payback? The cost is dramatically different. The cost of the solar power would increase in relation to the term of debt. Why? Interest rates. That if you're paying interest rate, accumulating interest rates, they compound. So a 20-year compounding interest rate is a lot of money. And so therefore people would say, well, what's the cost of solar power? Oh, it's $1 billion or whatever. Oh my God, well, what's the rate? 2 cents. Huh? And that's what's going on. Price theory pretends that there's a relationship, a direct proportional relationship between cost and price. There's not. It's an inverse relationship based on the financing. The interest rate has a primary determining factor of that accumulation of cost, and therefore the amount of the interest rate is paramount to the cost as well as the price of the power. Well, if you're tax exempt, your interest rate's a lot lower. If you have high security on your investment, such as provided by CCA revenue stream, as opposed to schmuck's monthly payment on his solar panel, schmuck who has a heart attack, schmuck who loses his job, schmuck whose wife leaves him, therefore doesn't come up with the cash, compared to entire city with, you know, $250 million in revenue under control of a contract monitored by the city attorney. Which one would you rather pay your debt on or collect debt from? City attorney. And so, therefore, lower interest rate. And therefore, if it's a public investment, it's a lot cheaper than a private investment. And so all of these layers show you the true structure of both price and cost, but also the dynamic structure which occurs based upon program design. So we got really involved in how do you optimize this? You know, if you settle the main concern for the sale of energy is in the kilowatt hour price. What are you going to charge people per minute for their energy? That's what the industry does. The structure of the industry is all based upon minutes of capacity and the kilowatt hour. And so that's the primary criterion of program design. You have to meet or beat that number, and you have to project it all the way out. And so we designed portfolio transitions from a conventional, this is what we've done for San Francisco, for Sonoma, for Marin, for all these CCAs, saying, look at what you can do. If you accept this criterion, you're going to meet or beat the rate, but you're going to accept longer-term contracts. You're going to provide, to the maximum extent legally possible, tax-exempt financing. And then you're going to create an optimal portfolio. That's the third layer. You're going to look at not just, oh, I'm buying so much energy, how much is the price, as if it were gasoline. No, you have, in the wholesale market, you're paying the price of power based upon the conditions, the weather conditions, and the so-called load conditions, the demand conditions, which are second-to-second fluctuations in demand. Those are dramatically different. So the peak cost of energy in the peak environment can be 2 or 3 times the cost of energy on the average conditions. The community has a lot of energy use in the daytime, then they're coinciding with the normal peak conditions in California and the desert, which are daytime air conditioning. Everyone has the air conditioning on all at the same time. And that demand drives up the price. So if you're able to install and select technologies that directly eliminate that load at the point of demand, behind the meter, right on top of that air conditioner, solar panels, you're not avoiding the cost of 12-cent power, you're avoiding the cost of 40-cent power. So if you control the whole portfolio, in other words, the ownership structure and the allocation of benefits for that installed solar panel, you're able to capture the savings from avoided costs at the wholesale system purchase level. So you can see how program design and the public nature and the actual control, operational control of that investment materially alter the economic thresholds that would define its economic feasibility. So when you hear the UC Berkeley professor saying, well, I'm sorry, the cost of solar power compared to the cost of natural gas, it's just not going to happen for 10 more years or 20 more years in the future. Well, that's just complete and utter balderdash. It's reification. It's taking the market conditions as they exist right now, with no modifications, monopoly utility, partial deregulation, isolated customers, residential, most of them, they're dividing it all by residential, no control, no ability to lower financing costs, no ability to determine repayment period, no ability to design the wholesale procurement. In that environment, then yeah, the cost of solar power is high. Why wouldn't it be, right? It's been utterly prejudiced to death to make it as expensive as possible. But if you change these triggers, toggle, 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 turn up the toggles, you know, set it up right. If you set it up right, lo and behold, you know, we have portfolios where we could, you know, Marin County could have gone to the 76% renewable and localized in a 5-year period at rates below PG&E.